Greetings and welcome to the AES, the Indiana AES section's virtual presentation meeting. I'm Jay Dill, your chairperson for the section and your host for this evening's event. For those of you who joined us in person for the broadcast tech tour at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway event, welcome back. And for those of you who are not able to join us, there is a report on the event under the Meetings Report tab on the section website, indianaaes.org. So before we get rolling here, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. So AES membership. If you're not currently a member, well, needless to say, we encourage you to join up and get involved. There are lots of truly useful benefits for the associate, student, and full membership that you can find on the mothership website, aes.org. So for example, some of the favorites are the AES special buy section, video library, but hey, go see for yourself. It's at aes.org. Now, I see the real value in joining the AES is in networking. The opportunity to meet people in your own locale or from all over the world, exchanging ideas, all in the pursuit of audio excellence. Now, as a reminder, on the local level, you can find out what's going on with our section at indianaaes.org. There you'll find information on membership and upcoming events. And speaking of upcoming events, the current plan is for a tech tour event in September and a DSP product development event in October. That should be fun. Both of them at this time are intended to be in-person events. So stay tuned for dates and locations. So now, as a viewer, if you have any questions during the program, please submit it in the chat section and we'll do our best to address it, or actually the Q&A section, either way. Now, on to the fun at hand. It is our great fortune to have with us Mr. Frank Padikkala with Audinate to discuss all matters Dante. Frank is a technology architect and evangelist, speaker, and social media influencer in the AV-IT space. With a background in IT cybersecurity, he advocates for the utilization of converged technologies and networks to create seamless end-user experiences. He places innovation, sorry, I got interrupted there. He places innovation and inclusion as his core values. As a community builder, he works on creating opportunities to promote diversity and equity in the AV industry. Amen. Frank currently works at Audinate, the creators of Dante, and as a technical sales engineer, and he is also the chair of the Avixa Diversity Council. Frank, welcome and thank you for joining us. We certainly appreciate taking time out of your schedule to be here with us tonight. Well, a lot of people are very interested in what's new and happening with Dante. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate this. This is going to be an exciting, fun, fast ride. I know we're trying to end at the top of the hour, so I have a couple of slides in a PowerPoint deck. Hopefully, this is not going to be a death by PowerPoint. The idea is to help you visually see some of the things that we're working on. So let me just go ahead and share my screen, and we shall take it from there. Quick thumbs up, Jay, if you can see that. Perfect. All righty. All right. Let's get on with it. So Jay reached out to Audinate, and Jay and Corey know each other. They've been talking, and then Corey looped me in. Corey Boyer is the director of solution sales. So if you end up having conversations about some of these solutions, you'll end up talking to somebody on Corey's team. I represent the engineering side of things. We're on the solutions engineering, and we like to help our partners, end users, customers, consultants, whoever you are, to help you design the solutions with Audinate and the wide range of things that we do today. So as we were talking, we were trying to get to a meeting topic that would be beneficial to everyone. And I thought the best way to approach this is from a technical perspective. So our conversation is around designing with Dante, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So we'll kind of go into some of the history of these things. So if you've not worked a lot on Dante products, there's an opportunity to learn some of it there. But we will go all the way up to what we're doing in terms of the bleeding edge of technology as far as Audinate is concerned. So quick little overview of the session. We're going to talk a little bit about the Dante platform. So Dante AV, I'm sure you've heard about it. We'll do a quick overview of Dante AV. And I know a lot of your focus, part of the AES group would be around audio, but there's an overlap here in your day-to-day job. So the hope is that we can give you some information there as well. And then we get into designing with Dante yesterday and today. And we kind of focus on where we are today from a technology perspective. We talk about the different components involved in Dante designs, and we get to the fun part where we talk about what's next. Thank you, Jay, for that wonderful introduction. Quick note, I have a QR code out there. If anyone would like to connect with me on LinkedIn or anything, I'm more than available to have a conversation with you about anything at all. I love talking to people. But yes, my background is in IT and cybersecurity, but I've been fortunate to kind of be on that edge. I've worked a lot for AV. I've worked with integrators. I've worked with various manufacturers before coming to Audinate. So my experience has been kind of there. I do AV, but the background is IT. And so I feel like that's where things are headed. And so if you're still on the edge about, hey, do we really need to learn networking and things like that? My response to you is, please do. It's like, I can't put it in a nicer way than that. You do have to, because we're all technology professionals. There's no need to be embarrassed about learning new things. I think that's the blessing. And I guess in a way, the challenge with AV or any technology thing is that you have to keep updating yourself. So, I'm here to help in whatever way I can. I'm sure we're all resources as far as that's concerned. So let's get into it. The first conversation is going to be Dante, the complete AV over IP platform. If you don't know, so I know a lot of people ask the question, do you work for Dante? Technically, we work for Audinate, which is the name of the company. And Dante is the solution, is the technology that we came up with. But I'm hoping you already know that. We are headquartered in Sydney, Australia. It was created by a group of network engineers. And Dante is truly the a complete interoperable IP solution for all AV manufacturers, right? And the reason why we say that is that we have about 450 manufacturers creating Dante-enabled products. There are more than 3,500 Dante-enabled solutions out there. We are a leader in the AV over IP space, primarily because of the proliferation of our solutions. According to surveys, we have about a 91% market share in terms of solutions out there on the audio over IP market. So as you design your systems, as you're trying to get audio onto your network, as you're trying to bring media solutions onto your network, Audinate is definitely one of those names that you have to be there and probably learn more about. So when we look at the platform that's Dante, we come at it from different perspectives, right? So what started off is obviously the audio products with the chips. You've probably heard of the Brooklyn 3s, the Ultimos, the Brooklyn 2s, Broadways. And with that, we also had a software suite that a lot of manufacturers are leveraging with DEP, DAL, and IP4. But to that, we added our video solutions, which is Dante AV Ultra and the Viper board, and a software solution represented by Dante AV-H. But we didn't stop there, right? We have our AVOs, which are our single adapter, those mini adapters that you've seen. It's great for if you're new to networked audio. It's an excellent way of bringing audio onto your networks. And then we have our audio software tools, which I'm sure a lot of you have used with Dante Virtual Sound Card, Dante Dia, and there are other third-party apps that utilize Dante as part of their software solutions. And then we move on to the video software tools, which includes Dante Studio, which is basically a combination of a TX-RX and a viewer that you can have on your PC. And then right on top of that, which we feel is the most critical part of the conversation today, is the management and control, right? That is for us at Audinate, the fork in the road, right? I think in the past, when you designed your networks, we leveraged a lot of those isolated networks, the air gap networks, as you like to call it. I coming from a security background, I will tell you there is no such thing. Unless you are truly air gapping the thing with concrete and all that good stuff, there's no such thing as an air gap network. So I think we've gone past that. And if we've not, you will pretty soon. And that's where we feel that management and control are kind of the most important conversation. So that's going to be kind of like the basis, the foundation of today's session. And, a quick little marketing thing that our team put together with all the different manufacturers. I think those are some of them that actually work and create audio, video, media products based on Dante technology. And then before we get into the design conversation, it's like I'm trying to build a story here. The story is we're talking about the different pieces. Dante AV has been talked about a lot. And if that's something that interests you, the importance of it is that it gets immediate interoperability to all the solutions that you have out there. So if you've become comfortable using Dante controller, and if you've seen how you can route things in the simplicity of Dante controller, basically Dante AV is just another line there. You'll see a video product, and the same principles apply. So the simplicity, the user experience is replicated when you use Dante AV, single tool, and that applies for all the management platforms out there, including and all the way up to Dante Domain Manager. We'll talk a little bit about Dante Domain Manager later on. In 2023, we've had a whole plethora of products being announced into production for sale in different stages of the supply chain lifecycle. These are some of the products that we were exhibiting at Infocom and NAB. The two major flavors that we have of Dante AV, just so that you get a quick understanding, are Dante AV Ultra and Dante AV-H. AV Ultra represents the high-end Dante offering. It's a substitute essentially for a network version of SDI and HDMI. And Dante AV-H is more for the audio and video in meeting rooms and smaller productions, right? And as you see the different features associated with it, Dante AV Ultra is visually lossless. AV-H has more compression associated with it. And there's feature differences. But the cool part about all of that is that we've created Dante Studio, which is a software that you load on your PC, but essentially has the ability to receive video signals from your Dante AV Ultra products and your Dante AV-H, and again, it can all be managed by the same platform. Now, as far as the audio associated with Dante video products, if you see any Dante AV Ultra solutions out there, they come with 8 channels of audio. Those 8 channels of audio are the same Dante audio channels. So, you could have the audio channels coming out of your encoders, your decoders, or whatever that is, and they could be routed to your mixers, amplifiers, and anything Dante you have existing without, there's nothing to do. It's the same Dante audio. A new addition to that list is Dante AV-A. It leverages the ASP technology. And as a quick point of comparison between them, you'll find some of this information on our website, and I'd be more than happy to give you anything if you had questions on these. But basically, there's a difference, and part of the driving force behind that is an application-based approach so that people can actually have the ability to choose what they need and the right product for the right fit, but all the while maintaining that unified control management security umbrella on top of it, right? So over the years, I'm sure that there's a saying that's famous in the audio AV broadcast circles where their standards are great, but you have a different standard every day. Unfortunately, the challenge is that a lot of times, as we are working with competing standards, the importance is that at some point there needs to be a user experience unification, and that's where the conversation about control and management becomes critical. And we'll go into that's the whole concept of our session today with design. So we'll get into some of that. So let's talk about designing with Dante, right? So yesterday and today, and again, and I say yesterday, this is not intended to be, I'm not calling out people who are not working on the bleeding edge. It depends on your customers. I mean, a lot of times we don't have control over the technologies that we work with. And some of the things that I say as part of yesterday, maybe or today, and I say today, you'll be like, oh my goodness, that was 5 years ago for me. I'm just trying to create a timeline. Essentially, everyone has their own time, right? So what was that Dante network in the past? And again, a lot of these things, when I say Dante, will also apply to any media over IP conversation, right? We saw a lot of flat single subnet networks. We saw things that, the AV professional's favorite thing in networking, the AV VLAN, right? Which is also equivalently the IT person's biggest nightmare. We have dedicated Dante network or the AV VLANs. Most of the communication happened within a LAN or site. And there was a design methodology associated with it. So in the past, if you wanted to design an audio over IP network or a media over IP network, we basically just had 2 components to deal with, right? There's the network elements, which is the switch, the cabling standards, and the port counts. And then there's the AV design. It was very endpoint centric. the management happened at a device level. There was no unification, so to speak. So essentially everything existed in its own little, space, air gapped or protected from the corporate network, right? A basic in-room Dante design would look something like this. You'd have your microphones, your cameras all coming out to one switch, and quite simple, honestly. And then with AVIOs, it gave the opportunity to people who have traditionally been using analog solutions to get into that, kind of get their feet wet in the audio over IP side of things by using these conversion tools, like these little fill boxes, these little devices that you can then convert and have the signals on the network, but you still use your traditional analog solutions right there. And for that reason, we have quite an array of solutions as far as Dante AVIOs are concerned. There's the ones with the analog IOs, there's AES3, there's a USB interface, there's a Bluetooth interface. It was cool because most of the time it was easy to install. It's this form factor is pretty small. They're plug and play, they're powered by PoE. And to kind of summarize a lot of the previous Dante designs is that it just worked. You plug it in and devices see each other and Dante controller, you put your routes in it and you're good to go. So what happened? Like, why did we have to take something that was so good and break it, essentially make our lives difficult? Well, IT happened, right? My favorite meme here, it was not personal, it was business, right? When IT started taking control over your switches and wanted to have an understanding of what traffic is happening on their networks, the conversations became difficult, right? So it leads us to today. Where are we today in terms of our network designs? What's happening today? Well, let's take a look at the features of network AV design today. Enterprise networks with IT teams involved, right? So as you're having these conversations, you're going to have to explain to an IT person who's never really understood the beauty of a microphone, that's tell them that, hey, I have this microphone that needs to be on this switch. And they're like, why? Can't you just plug your PC in? And you're like, no, this is the chairman's boardroom. This is a meeting room. This is a broadcast studio. I need broadcast quality gear in there. And they're like, tough luck, I can't do that. And then you go in back and forth, right? So IT teams are involved. An increased device count, right? This is very interesting. I've had this conversation with several people. 5 years ago, if somebody had asked you, what's your biggest audio over IP deployment look like? How many devices do you have on the network? They'd be like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, and that would be considered a big network. Today, it's in the hundreds, some even in the thousands. And honestly, like with DDM and everything, we have several customers who are pushing that limit to its maximum, right? So an increased device count, increased bandwidth requirements. Again, on the audio side of things, with our uncompressed audio, a lot hasn't changed there. But as far as video is concerned, once video came onto the network, you're looking at connections, at links that can essentially saturate a 1 gig link, right? So we're running into challenges there. Now, it's even worse if you go into SMPTE and other standards that use uncompressed video. You're looking at fiber connections running over the place, but it is still a network. So bandwidth requirements have changed. We're looking at longer distances. So it's funny, like in the past when somebody said, yeah, it's my LAN, they were literally talking about a building or a couple of floors in a building. That same logic sort of applies today, but it's just grown. Like you can have a LAN, but it's a campus, and it's like I get like I can get in like 1 millisecond of latency. Where's that building? Oh, it's like 5 miles away. We have a fiber connection running from point to point. So the distances have grown. We're talking a lot about layer 3 routing now, right? So no more just relying on your switch, you're actually routing traffic now. You have access control lists, you have firewalls, you have all kinds of network architecture that is more on the layer 3 and above side of things, deciding on where your traffic goes. And a very, very important thing, security, right? Everybody talks about security. Nobody wants to do it. It's a pain. It's challenging. Why can't we just keep the things that we were? Sadly, I do not think that we're going back to a time when security was not a concern. With each passing day, The threats have grown. The threat landscape has simply increased too much for companies to ignore the reality that security needs to be a part of every AV design conversation. So the hope with today's session is that we can kind of give you those little pointers to look forward and how Dante can be a tool in your chest as you're designing your networks. Centralized management and a single dashboard, right? A lot of times, it's interesting how in the past when we talk to large end users and customers about our solutions, they'd be like, well, what can the microphone do? What can the speaker do? What can the amplifier do? And we would talk about the technical specs associated with the audio and the video. Today, a lot of times they're asked like, what kind of API interface does it have? Can I integrate this with this? I have SolarWinds, I have ABCD that's collecting data. Does your system interface with that? You can see that IT impact on every networked media conversation today. And that's kind of driven by the fact that a centralized management and a single dashboard are becoming a part of a lot of these higher end conversations when budgeting is decided. Leaner teams, right? So the reality of it is that if you've worked as part of a group of people who've created a solution, the likelihood of that team having grown significantly over the last 5-10 years, it's very low. You may have added a resource or two, but largely teams have remained the same size. But the expectation is that you do more, right? So in the past, if it was 10 people doing 10 projects, now it's the same 10 people doing 100 projects. So teams have not grown to keep up with the demand. And that's a challenge that everybody's facing, right? So what do? We have to change our design methodology, right? And a lot of the conversation about the actual functionality of the device is not as critical today as opposed to the architecture that needs to go into these designs. So in this section on design methodology, we're going to talk about the network elements, and we're going to start with network architecture design, right? Again, I'm not going to do a deep dive because obviously I'm trying to wrap this up in the hour, but obviously we're here as a resource if you'd like to talk about any of these things. And the intent is also I'd like to give you information that's kind of generic. So the whatever you're hearing now is not just pertinent to Dante related things, it's also anything network. So network architecture design, I'm sure you've seen this. You've seen the 3-layer model where there was a core layer of switches going down to a distribution layer, all the way to an access layer that's located, closest to your point of interaction, whether it be a classroom, whether it be a broadcast studio, whether it be a studio, whatever it is, there's those access switches, right? So this is kind of like the traditional approach to network architecture. That has changed. It has been replaced with a spine and leaf. So as opposed to a top-down approach, it goes more to a side-to-side approach where there is an added focus on resource distribution, redundancy, and making sure that there's easier communication pathways between devices. So you'll see a lot of these spine leaf architecture designs as far as the foundational network architecture is concerned. Then the other part that we add into this conversation is the concept of a secure network design, right? So if you've designed a system, a media system and a media network, in the past, security was never really at the forefront of your design. You never thought about security because you thought, well, all I need to do is make sure that my devices talk to each other. What about security? Well, that's not my job, and so there's an IT department that takes care of security. And a lot of those conversations was because there was this traditional approach to security. We call it the defense in depth, right? Essentially, you had, I like to give the example of a castle that's surrounded by a moat. So if you're looking at one of those people who are orange, for them to get into the courtyard or whatever you want to call this beautiful castle, they had to pass the moat. And then if they wanted to get in, they had to go through a door or some kind of an entry point where there were sentries posted. And so there was layers of defense, and you had to, in order to get to the main prize or the crown, essentially, you had to go through layers and layers and layers of defense. So the assumption in a layered approach to security is that each person has inherently a certain amount of freedom or a certain amount of leverage that they can utilize. So depending on who you are, you can get to a certain point, right? Now, this was the traditional approach to security. And the reason why I say that is that as you're designing your systems, we were comfortable thinking that, yeah, I mean, it's a conference room, it's a studio. Who's going to access that place? We're fine with that, right? It's okay. As long as the door is locked, we're cool. Nobody's going to use that. That has changed. And that has been replaced with what we hear a lot today called zero trust networks. Now, what is a zero trust network? I'm going to use the same castle and moat as my example, but essentially every person that you see on there has turned into my mother, right? I don't trust anyone is the approach to zero trust. You don't trust people anymore. You don't trust anything. So before we had a layered approach, step by step, every person has a certain amount of freedom depending on who they are. In zero trust, we don't trust anyone anymore. Like nothing. None of y'all supposed to be anywhere. I don't trust you. And you have to prove to me why you need to be at a certain position within that architecture, right? Now, how does this affect media networking design? It means that now you have to talk to your teams who have these IT teams who have the zero trust networks that, hey, I have this box and it needs to talk to A, B, C, D, and you need to be specific about that, right? Because it is only going to talk to those devices. And a lot of times we were never concerned about that because as we got into designing network solutions, our mindset was, hey, I just replaced that SDI cable with a network cable, right? That's not what happened. You didn't just replace the cable. The OSI model has 7 layers in it. And if you still think as a layer 1 professional, you're only going to replace the cable. That is not what IT teams want. That's why if you've ever submitted a line drawing showing how things are cabled, and you go to an IT department with it, and they're like, I don't care what this is. It's not on my, I don't even get it. Like, what is this, right? If you've had that experience, it's because they don't really care about layer 1. For them, the problem starts from layer 3 and above, right? And our problem is we've never thought like that. So as you're going to design your new network solutions, bear in mind that something like a zero trust network will require you to specify the traffic, the flow of traffic. And that's where things get a little tricky for us, right? Now, the other concept of secure network design is essentially to compartmentalize, right? Segmentation and segregation. So we've heard of that. We've heard of VLANs. We've heard of subnets, which, by the way, are 2 different things. You can't use the words interchangeably. Please don't do that. And whatever form of segmentation you've come across, that is a valid way of securing your network. But the problem is we don't use that a lot of times, right? We try not to get into complex things. We like to, if we can get away with using a switch in its default settings, that's when we're at our happiest, but that's not going to work anymore, right? We need to start thinking like security professionals, and it's not too hard. Here's the thing. Our industry has overlapped with other industries for decades. Like, we've worked with so many different trades and we've adopted their best practices. We've learned from all of them. It's just that when it got to IT and networking, we said, nah, we're too cool for that. Let them do that. We can't do that anymore. And that's the message that I come to you. So as we talk about designing networks with Dante solutions, it's important to understand where the networks are headed. So let's understand a little bit about the components that can be included in Dante designs, right? So again, Dante AV over IP and its core components. In the past, it would have been easier to say, yeah, it's just audio. But today, we have software-based solutions and hardware-based solutions. We have management and transport mechanisms. There's discovery and control. These are all significantly different from just approaching it as, oh, I have a microphone that needs to get to this mixer, or I have a stage box that needs to get to the here. I have a location from one point to the other. The approach of design needs to be shifted to understand that there are more than just that singular path of media that goes from point to point, right? And to help you in that is Dante Domain Manager, right? The core functionality of the Dante Domain Manager is to help you with centralized monitoring and management of Dante systems, right? This is a quick look at the different concepts that are included in Dante Domain Manager. So there's Dante domains, which basically means that these are logical groupings of devices, media devices, which are audio or video. It enables continuous monitoring because it's a server-based application that is running all the time. We get a lot of these reports and functionality from Dante Controller, but when you turn off Dante Controller, obviously you don't know what's happening. That's where DDM is different in that it gives you an ongoing monitoring of everything that's happening. there is also device management, and you can maintain the integrity of the system. There's staff management, which is very important, right? It enables you to create users, decide on what each person has access to. You can actually use the commonly used IT principle of least privilege and apply it to your audio video solutions once you have a Dante Domain Manager. You can run audits where there's an exact audit trail of device behavior. When did a device go offline? When did it go online? You know, when did the latency change? When did the clocking change? There are things like that that typically we need to approach our network professionals for, and they never give you definitive answers. Now with Dante Domain Manager, you have the ability to get that audit trail, right? And obviously multi-subnet support, which is again a very important functionality. It just changes the way you design your network. You don't have to be compartmentalized to that single subnet architecture, which is how a lot of systems are designed. You can actually have your AV devices designed in whatever way is convenient to your application, utilize DDM to bring it all together in that single user interface that we know as Dante Controller and with the UI of DDM, right? So designing with DDM, and I like to give this as a very simple, this is more of like a conceptual way of understanding what DDM does for you. So imagine there's location A, which a bunch of devices that are all able to talk to each other, everything's fine. And then there's a location B. The significance of location A and B are that they're both on different networks. But now you have a new requirement, right? You want to be able to send media from location A to B. And what you've done is that you have a router, right? Now, if you were to ask the question, does it really matter to a switch or a router what exactly it's transporting? The answer is no. It doesn't care what's in the packet because it's a packet. It's a data packet, and it's going to send it. And the job of the router and the switch is to make sure that transport path is established, right? So essentially, you can establish routes between location A and B. And then what happens is DDM comes as essentially a management overlay over both of them, right? So you're still leveraging your networking devices, your routers, your switches, your layer 3 switches, and all that good stuff to make sure that the communication paths are established. But you bring in a management layer with DDM, which is able to translate that to the old Dante controller. So you go into Dante controller and essentially open it up, and you can route audio from a microphone in location A to an amplifier or a mixer in location B. And it doesn't matter as far as the person doing the routing is concerned, because at a networking layer, we have established that path. And that's what DDM does. It enables the functionality to have multiple subnets, multiple segregated networks, and even zero trust architectures are greatly benefited by using something like DDM. So no matter how complex your network is, DDM is truly an IT person's solution to making sure that you can maintain the integrity of your network architecture while establishing the simplicity of Dante controller and the user experience that you've grown accustomed to. So now a quick look at what that Dante AV control and management looks like, right? So as far as Dante AV is concerned, if you look at this is a screenshot of Dante controller, right? And you see that video RX to the video TX, nothing's really changed. It looks like the same old Dante controller. It's that now we've added in the video, we have USB, we have infrared or serial. So depending on the manufacturer, Dante is essentially turning into that one single platform where everything is transported on. We are the pipe, for lack of a better word, right? We transport everything. So it's independently routed as well. So imagine you have laptops and an encoder talking to projectors and an audio console or a keyboard and mouse. Essentially, depending on the traffic, you know, if it's USB, it goes into the device and it's sent to the laptop, or video from point A to point B, or audio, you can route all of that individually using Dante controller, and that is by design. So that gives you the flexibility to essentially create this single layer of media on your network, and using the control mechanism, be able to send that wherever you want to. And then we come into the conversation that we started off with today, managed Dante networks, right? So what that means is that from that point where we were just leveraging layer 2 and plugging everything into a switch and relying on, static IP addressing, we've gone past that, right? We've essentially talked about the point. We've got to the point where we have managed Dante devices. And with managed Dante devices, with DDM, we've essentially created an API management network, a management layer for your Dante network. We leverage a language called GraphQL, which is kind of like the newer, a lot of people are using that as their API protocol, as opposed to REST API. I'm sure you've used REST in the past, and from an architecture perspective, there are differences that kind of led us to go towards GraphQL. One of the prime reasons for that is that we envisioned a scenario where there would be a lot of data happening on these networks, and that's the truth of it, is that with video, control, audio, there's a lot of things happening, right? And even though a lot of this is happening, the fact of the matter is that it's important. It is really important for us to be able to be granular with the controls. The way REST API is architected, when you're trying to retrieve data from a REST API server or from a server, the data is a large table, and then you have to use programming to parse through it to get to the point of data that you need. GraphQL is very granular. So essentially, what we can do is that we can create dashboards, we can leverage it for data analytics and visualization, we can leverage it with a control GUI. Any device that's capable of issuing an HTTP string can be enabled to send GraphQL queries to your Dante domain manager. And what that does is that, for a translation, is that essentially you could have something as simple as a stream deck to be able to set subscriptions between from channel 1 to channel 2 on device A to device B, whatever that is, right? You can create those very granular functions and fine tune your user experience, because that, I feel, is the most important thing that a lot of times we overlook. As we grow in technology, it's important that we maintain that flexibility of use, that ease of use that a lot of people would like, right? Because if you're not an IT professional, you don't want to spend hours troubleshooting these things. You want somebody to be able to create something simple, like a button that can do this, and something simple that enables the functionality that you desire. And that's what we do with that GraphQL API interface. Essentially, Dante Domain Manager turns into a data aggregator. It creates that management control plane, and it helps you with logging and monitoring. So whatever be your requirement, the future of managed Dante networks with DDM and other control, with the control layer, is to ensure that we have a mechanism to be able to not just make audio go from point to point or video go from point to point, but have a holistic view and understanding of everything that's happening on your Dante network. And that is truly like what IT people want to hear. That's what IT departments want to understand. They don't want traffic that they cannot account for, but the tools that we're building in from a control management perspective and creating those managed Dante networks helps us to basically give them what they want in terms of information. And so we come into the cool part of the session today. We're going into what's next. So, I mean, just to kind of recap, I know this is an information overload. I'm hoping that Jay lets me come back again so that I can like do a deep dive of each of these individual sessions and, just go and give you more technical conversations about all of this. But, my goal today was to help you with all the terminology, all the things that are happening at Dante, right? So we talked about Dante AV, we talked about the importance of managed Dante, and we talked about how we're designing yesterday and today. And this is basically that tomorrow conversation. So what's next?
So
and,
Frank,
yeah,
before we move on, got a couple of questions. I think is probably a good time to interject.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the first, and this one came in right at the very beginning. So it was prior to certification, one of the best ways to gain experience with Dante. As a recent college grad, only learning about Dante via AES, how can I gain hands-on experience before certification? Well, I think the answer to that question is pretty much to just voluntarily throw yourself into the water.
Yeah.
Just ask around to other people in your locale network. What are they doing with Dante? And just see if you can just sponge information. When I took my very first Dante certification, I learned pretty much about everything that was necessary to be able to build that network and how to make it work from that certification. It was incredibly informative, and it was simple, and it was very well presented. and it's free. And if I remember right, the guys still have that Dante, I mean, the base level certification is still available on your website, isn't it?
Yep, they're all available, and we also did an update about a year and a half ago-ish. So there's essentially like a version 2 of the Dante level 1, 2, 3 certification. So I mean, to get into more detail, and Jay, that was an excellent response. The truth is, what we need to do is we need to start off with Dante level 1. Level 1 gets into that single switch, that entry level Dante conversation. Level 2 kind of takes it to more managed switches and a multiple switch environment, and level 3 goes into more of the routed networks and everything. So there's a progressive growth path with the level 1, 2, 3 certification. But the whole of all three would probably take you like 6 to 8 hours. Just to let you know, we've also recently released a Dante Domain Manager Administrator course, which is a very, very intense deep dive into all things DDM, also available on our website for free. It is really an IT conversation. It talks a lot about, the various integrations of DDM with LDAP and SNMP and all the other things that we're doing. And it's a great course. I'm not just saying that because I actually wrote the course as well. I was part of the team that built the course. So it is really a good course. And we've brought in a very IT approach to it. So please, go to audinate.com, check out our learning portal. We put a lot of these different videos out there. And, ourselves included in the sales team, we're always traveling. We're going to different locations. We're at events. So, just keep following us on the socials and all that good stuff. And we'll make sure that you can stay educated. And in terms of practicing, it all starts with a switch, honestly, and a couple of devices, something like a DVS, you can buy off our website and, just start playing with that Dante audio. And the good thing is, once Dante Controller, by the way, is also a free download. So there are a lot of things, there are a lot of good resources on our website that you can use.
So there was another question that had to do with network traffic, whether being sent, and you mentioned this before about the AV LAN. So Dante can live beside regular network traffic, but there are some best practices that you guys have for doing so. Can you briefly go into a couple of those?
Absolutely. So, if you go to our website, again, there's a lot of good resources in terms of what are the best resources. We actually have a document. It's like a simple 2-pager that says it's an IT administrator's guide to Dante networks. And it's basically that intro into how to set up Dante on networks. But to answer the question, Dante lives perfectly fine alongside any other traffic. It's just, as far as the Dante network, the network is concerned, it's just data. Some of the practices are like, if depending on the type of devices, you may need to turn off energy efficiency on certain ports. There are certain things that you need to do, but it's all listed on there. Ports become a little bit of a conversation starter for, like, if you're taking this to a large enterprise network, because inherently they like to block every port, and we need certain ports to be able to enable the conversations between the Dante devices. But we have explanations, we have white papers, we have documentation. So if you're at that point where you're trying to build a network, the quick answer is yes, it can exist on any network. And depending on the level of detail that you need, our teams are always ready to help you with the information. And just, again, the audinate.com is quite resourceful as far as that's concerned.
Okay, so we got one last question before you get going next. In terms of security and using DDM, what kind of credentials can be used for DDM? Does it support Active Directory, or how about SSO? I'm not familiar with SSO, so if you could help with that, that would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So to answer your question, the first layer of credentials that you can create within DDM is DDM itself has its own user database. So you can create users, you can create users with varying roles. Depending on the number of domains, you can have domain-specific roles, you can have site-wide roles, you can give read-only access. There's a whole range of built-in roles that we have within DDM, but there are also custom roles where you can get as granular as you want in terms of the access that you want to give. So that's kind of like the first step of the credentials. The next part of your question was, does it support Active Directory? Yes, it does. We have an LDAP integration. And again, it is a read-only connection with your LDAP server, which means that DDM in itself is not making any changes to it if that's a concern for your IT teams. We are just basically reading through a particular table that you specify for user information. And once those users once the connection between DDM is established, the users can log into DDM or Dante Controller for that matter with the same credentials that they used to log into LDAP. The next part of that was SSO, which is single sign-on. Single sign-on is one of those things that we've heard a lot. It is on our developers' list of to-do things. I can't speak to what the priority of that is, but today we do not support single sign-on. But with some of the conversations that we're having with the tomorrow, there's no reason why it couldn't be a feature that's added on in the future. But today we don't support single sign-on.
Okay, very good. Well, let's move on.
Perfect. All right, so let's get back to our tomorrow. And so I'm sure if you've been at any of our major trade show announcements, you've probably heard about Dante Connect. And Dante Connect is essentially taking our professional audio broadcast production from anywhere to anywhere, right? And what does that mean, right? Essentially, you can produce your audio anywhere, you can send it anywhere, right? So Dante Connect delivers in-sync audio from wherever to wherever you need it. And it is the same Dante audio that you leverage and that you use on-prem, right? So essentially, this is a cloud-based integration that enables leveraging the cloud as your infrastructure for sending audio from point A to point B. And kind of the driving force behind this, again, the pandemic created a lot of challenges for a lot of things, but it also gave us an opportunity to innovate. Because one of the things that a lot of people couldn't do was the simplicity of just rolling a truck in to a production site and just getting things set up was no longer something that could be done easily, right? The challenges with travel, the challenges with crew and staffing became so significant that people started looking into remote production. I'm sure you've heard of Remy, where there's remote integration and all those good things that have happened. And people came to us and said, what can we do with Dante? Because we have tons of gear on-prem. We have lots of Dante gear in our trucks. How can we get these things to talk to each other? So we went about trying to essentially create a solution. I was fortunate to be one of those first team members as we created our small team internally to essentially brainstorm and come at the solution, right? So what we've essentially created today in Dante Connect, and Dante Connect is not a product per se, it is essentially like an umbrella term that includes multiple products, some of which you've heard before, some that are new, and that's kind of the components of Dante Connect. So again, Dante Domain Manager becomes another important piece of that conversation as far as our cloud-based workflow is concerned, right? It helps provide the orchestration, the security, it helps with the discovery of Dante devices, and it basically sets permissions and allows for organizations to create those production environments, right? There's also a Dante Virtual Sound Card. Now, the Dante Virtual Sound Card that you're going to see in the cloud-based deployments are slightly different. So if you're an expert with Dante Virtual Sound Card, you know that there's a limited latency range in terms of that. It doesn't have the ability to become a clock leader, and those are some of the challenges with that. So with the cloud version of DVS, what we've done is that we've increased the latency to up to 40 milliseconds. It is capable of becoming a clock leader, and some changes there. So basically, it can communicate with PTPv2. And so one of the new solutions that became as part of the suite of products that are in Dante Connect is what we call our Dante Gateway. Now, Dante Gateway is based off of our DEP technology, which is a Dante embedded platform, which you've seen in a lot of solutions out there that create software-based Dante products that are not chip-based, right? What we did with Dante Gateway is essentially create that single point of functionality for some of the critical pieces when trying to do a cloud-based workflow, right? One of the challenges with most cloud-based workflows is clocking. Clocking is a huge problem there, right? So if you're ever trying to set up something remotely and you want PTPv2 clocking, it means that you have to leverage GPS clocks. And GPS clocks are great, very functional, gives you PTPv2. But if you're sending this to a challenge, the expectation of them, all right, setting up this antenna where there's pretty high up your roof, and setting this whole thing up becomes challenging. And we're talking about a setup where resources are a premium. You can't just send staff to anywhere you want, right? So that's why we created the Dante Gateway. It is capable of becoming a clock leader for devices in its own cloud environment or locally. It leverages NTP, and it is also essentially able to give you asymmetric latency, right? So you've seen this setup. We've seen Dante over distance in the past, where we've sent audio from one point to other that are thousands of miles away using lease lines and all those things. And when we did that, again, we used Dante Domain Manager, but the core component behind some of those things was the fact that the latency was within that 40 millisecond range. So if you have Dante products out there, 40 milliseconds is that cap, which works for a lot of different locations. But when you're doing cloud-based transport and you're trying to send audio globally from in our test environments, we were sending it from Sydney to New York and very long distances, that 40 millisecond is not enough. This is where the gateway comes in and is able to provide asymmetric latency. So you can receive audio from these distant sources at a high latency, but it outputs audio at a lower latency. It essentially provides that bridge. So you can maintain that low latency environment locally, all the while you're able to create those long distance links. And the reason why we're so concerned about latency is because, again, in our cloud environment, the audio is still uncompressed. So if you have a device on-prem that's creating a Dante audio channel and you're trying to send it to the cloud, it is the same audio channel. There is no conversion, there is no format redistribution of anything of that sort. It is the same uncompressed audio. And to that, we have remote monitoring. And in fact, our latest iterations will eventually have remote contribution, which is actually leveraging the public internet to become a part of that Dante network. And examples of this is like of synchronized audio in the cloud is that a lot of cloud production happens. You're able to send audio from instance to instance, all within the same region, right? Then we look at that multi-region environment where we can still maintain things sub 40 milliseconds. When it goes past that, that's when we leverage our gateway to be able to receive audio. So I have a slide here that shows some latency graphs. And this is a gateway in California receiving audio from a DVS instance in Sydney, and it's averaging about 72 milliseconds, right? Again, you have California to California running at about 2 milliseconds. And that's the power of the gateway. The gateway is able to receive audio at varying latencies depending upon the connection, right? And thereby, you're able to produce things at scale. You're also able to bring remote sites to the cloud. So this is an actual setup that we have. In my home office, I've set up like a couple of audio devices, and we use a GPS cloud to be able to send audio into the cloud. So essentially, we have that ground to cloud component. We've figured out the cloud to cloud component, and essentially you can bring audio back again with the cloud to ground component. And this can actually be expanded without the GPS clock using the gateway, which is run on-prem. So a lot of our development initially happened over AWS, and that's why you will see in our marketing documentation and our spec sheets, you will see references to AWS terminology, but the technology is truly cloud agnostic, and we have various cloud vendors right now testing and validating the solutions successfully. We have a lot of customers working on these things, right? So that is the power of tomorrow. We've essentially taken the same principle that we did many years ago when we first created Dante by saying, hey, we can use the Ethernet as our infrastructure. We've just replaced that with the cloud. And then the cloud has turned into our infrastructure so that we can maintain these ultra low latency connections on-prem while bringing in audio from very long distances, leveraging the cloud and truly creating a very simplified remote production environment that saves you a lot of cost in terms of the OV trucks and the other resources that you need to set up these remote productions, right? And then with the remote monitoring and the contribution functionality, you can actually use, it's actually, that part of it is compressed audio because we have to use the public internet. We use WebRTC, and using WebRTC, we're able to listen, and we can add devices. Something as simple as your cell phone could become a monitoring tool to a Dante network in the cloud. So truly a lot of functionality, and what brings it all together. So the reason why I talked about the API before is that a lot of this functionality is built using the API, right? So we are able to create Terraform modules. Terraform is basically an automation platform where you can spin up instances, at the push of a button. But what we do is that using Terraform modules and the API, we can actually create production environments with the push of a button, the simplicity that any person can handle. And you can even pre-test this, right? Something as simple as, let's have this audio channel in in America, go to this audio channel in the United Kingdom. All that passed and ready to go with the push of a button is is the capability that we have with Dante Connect. So truly endless, right? So that's kind of where we're going with this. That's the conversation for today. We've taken a long journey from where we were in terms of traditional audio video networks, and we've come to the point where we're leveraging cloud and API technologies to create very, very cool solutions. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. But thanks again for the opportunity, and I will stop sharing my screen. And if there's any other questions.
Well, Frank, there are a couple more questions.
Yeah.
There's one here about, is there any movement on DDM being available on a new OS platform?
Yes, there is.
So
There's a lot of movement. I am not at liberty to announce the specifics of it. I will leave that to the marketing department. But yes, we have heard the challenges associated with CentOS 7, and we're definitely moving towards other solutions that are integrated. And part of the driving force is actually the whole cloud infrastructure that we have. And so, yes, you will see those in the very near future.
So there was one other question. It's in the Q&A. So if you want to select the Q&A there, you see the last one there from David. Maybe you might want to read through that one, or maybe you might want to get back to him. I'm not sure. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, I would love to reach out to you, David, and my email's here. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn or email. I'd love to reach out, and we'll definitely have a conversation on this. I'll be more than happy to.
That's pretty unique analysis.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It truly is. Is.
David says thanks. Okay. Well, if I don't know, we can give it a minute or so. I personally had one question for you, and that one was something that comes up in conversation a lot. Is the world of AES 67 and Dante.
Yeah.
And AES 67 being a bridge between different protocols.
Yep.
Without discovery, and how Dante embraced that and going forth. So could you touch a little bit on how that's
absolutely
changed?
Absolutely. There's no change in that. We realize the importance of having interoperability with the varying standards out there, because people will leverage what they're comfortable with what they've come used to. And that was kind of the driving force behind the integration with AES 67, which natively Dante devices support, right? But that's the cool part about having a solution like DDM. DDM enables that and takes it to the next level in terms of the integration. With DDM, you have interoperability with SMPTE 2110 audio, and we only plan on enhancing that. Whenever there's a need from our customer community in terms of interoperability, we will keep on engineering solutions to make sure that those are happening. And DDM will always be in that core conversation, because we do need a control aggregated layer to essentially enable that communication between the interoperating standards. And DDM is always DDM, or our control platform, whatever you utilize, will provide that. So there is no change in that process. We're always going to push towards that and make sure that interoperability is a part of the functionality that we offer with Dante.
Cool. Yeah, cool. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Let's see. There was one more here. Do you foresee simple solutions like the AVIO line coming to the video side of Dante AV, or does video present challenges that make those developments unlikely or more challenging?
It's not unlikely. At the moment, again, if you want a little history of AVIOs, it was not something that we came out day one. There was a market need that kept being asked of, hey, can somebody make something like this? And we kept looking at our manufacturer partners to say, hey, we're getting a lot of these requests. Are any of y'all doing this? And eventually there was no response, and that's kind of how we came to it. So again, we were following the same principle with Dante AV. We will always give the manufacturer partners the opportunity to build those solutions like the AVIOs. But when the market is loud enough, and if the needs are not met, we will obviously do it. So this is a question that gets asked of us like every single session that I've done with Dante AV. So absolutely, it is something that we are planning for.
Well, the AVI dongles were an important piece in as much as being able to bring any legacy devices onto the network. Exactly. I mean, you had your favorite whatever box, and they never built it with the Dante.
That's
and
true.
but it's still a good box and you still want to use it. So you got to get it on the network. And this was
A simple way of
matter
doing
of
it.
fact, not only simple, but very affordable. I
That's
mean,
true. That's
gee
true.
whiz, really.
That is true. Very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very true.
Well, I think we're at the witching hour here, pal. So Frank, thank you so very much. That was a really well thought out, well done presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you again for sharing your evening with us, more importantly. I know that's time out of your life to do that. And I want to make sure that you know that it's very much appreciated. And so thanks to everyone else out there that joined us this evening. And stay tuned. For those of you in Indiana and want to stay close to the indianaaes.org site, stay tuned. We got some great events coming up here in the future. So thanks everybody, and good night. Thanks again, Frank.
Thank you very much.